Hi, everybody. Adam Metallo with the Digitization Program Office at the Smithsonian. It's under the Office of the Chief Information Officer there, and we work with all the museums, archives, libraries, galleries to increase the quality and quantity of digitization across the organization. Specifically, my role is to increase the impact of said digitization. So how do we get the maximum mileage out of all the work that we're putting into what we're doing? And computer vision and machine learning and things like this are one of the most exciting ways that I think that we can show the potential of our collections at scale. And so this is definitely something that merits a lot of attention and focus. This is sort of two parts. First, I've been haunting a lot of sort of trade show industry conferences over the past few months to sort of see what other industries are doing with the technology, how they're thinking about it, how far along one group is versus another. So the NVIDIA conference late last year, they've convinced me that GPUs will solve all of our problems. But beyond the propaganda, it's clear that this is having an effect across all industries. This is not something that's sort of unique, and we definitely need to make sense of it sooner or later, and sooner's ideal in my mind. I went to a conference run by AAM called Museums and New Intelligences. The emphasis there was really on in-gallery experiences. So imagine a camera maybe tracking visitors' expressions, and they may be happy or sad or bored or excited, and that's kind of a way to get a metric. I think that's super interesting. I also think that's something that is going to be commoditized by a lot of other industries, and that's probably not the domain that we need to worry too much about making progress. GSA Future Services now was a government-centric conference. The clear message there was that across agencies, they're thinking about this technology and they're aggregating there as well. And so they're one major set of stakeholders that the Smithsonian and I think cultural heritage can look to leverage our data against government data. National Academy of Sciences, the science of deep learning. A lot of the scientists went a bit out of their way to say this is not a black box. It's a very big, complicated box, and you don't know how it works until you've built it and you've run it and see how it breaks. But there is recourse when things go wrong, and you can go back and see how do you need to tweak things. And I think the real trick with this stuff is the lack of transparency that most industries have in making models available. And for us, I think one of our superpowers that we can leverage here is our ability to be more transparent with these models, and we could play a major role with ethics and standard operating procedures for how we use this technology. Fantastic Futures was a conference put on with Stanford University Libraries and National Library of Norway. And there, librarians are great. They can adapt to anything and say, yeah, that's stuff librarians do. And they were pretty ready to say, yeah, it really doesn't make sense to strictly think in terms of the libraries. This is a scenario where we're all stronger together across disciplines. Another really critical thing there was I heard a bit about triangulating low quality, low accuracy data to get high quality results. And if you think about our collections records, when we get our collections records perfect, we put them out into the world and we're very proud of it. When our collections records are not perfect, we hide them in shame until we either retire or until we have time to get around to making it perfect. Then we'll release it. And I think that finding a way to make this imperfect data visible and something that we can compute against to bootstrap the quality of our data is a critical possibility. As a kind of a standard explainer for machine learning versus classical programming, so this was useful for me to sort of wrap my head around a really fundamental difference between what we're doing here, and I think this is sort of the cultural change that a lot of folks across the Smithsonian are going to need to wrap their heads around as well. You sort of switch the equation a little bit. I think the really interesting thing is the possibility of bootstrapping and the fact that we do have all the raw ingredients with our data as it stands, flaws and all, to get much better data out of what we currently have at our disposal. Moving on to a workshop and presentation series that we did in a collaboration with Google Arts and Culture. and the data science lab with Rebecca Deco. Basically, the goal here was to introduce people from across the Smithsonian to general premises of machine learning through a webcast and lecture series. And then we also did a workshop where we invited a bunch of people from different disciplines from across the Smithsonian to sort of think about how this applies to their own work. You can see the very credible gentleman on the left-hand side there with his hand gestures, speaking later. So very simply, the goals here were to provide a basic introduction to machine learning, try to identify what our common challenges are, and then also to be very deliberate about developing grounds for collaboration, very much like what we're doing here today. And I think what keeps me excited about this stuff is just this visualization and defining what this long tail of our cultural heritage collections are. If we can do that, and the more specifically we can do that, I think the more important we become, not just at getting good at using these tools, but at giving back to the industry and playing a role in how AI and machine learning and machine vision and every variation of these terms is affecting our world. Tried to visualize this a handful of different ways because nobody ever seems to think that's as important as I do. This is something I pulled together on the train. It's kind of lame. I think this is more compelling, but not as accurate. So how did we go about organizing this event? We had approximately 50 different participants. So on the left-hand side here, you can see representation from different units. Sometimes we had a couple of people from a unit, sometimes just one rep. And basically, we organized them into different cohorts with different themes: accessibility, American Women's History Initiative, art, history and culture, informatics and metadata, science, search and discovery, transcription and translation. And as you can see by this next slide, oh, nope, I'll wait for that punchline. We came up with about 65 independent concepts that were derived, and some of these were sort of one-off. Somebody said, hey, this would be a great idea, write it down, that's a concept. Other things that were brought to the table were things that folks have been thinking about for months or years and want to bring to the table as a possible project to move forward. And now you can see as we break down all these individual concepts and try to find what the relationship is between them, we now have a tangled mess. When we tried to thematically organize what our interests were, it no longer made sense. And so the physical boundaries of the walls of our museums as we make the digital transition are making less and less sense. But I think that with this wave of new technology, they are going to make less sense far more quickly, and it's something that we can prepare for. Some of the critical strategic interests were bias, of course, and understanding the bias in our own collections. This is something I feel strongly is a risk, of course, but I think it's a potential benefit as much as it is a liability. So I'll try to talk a little bit more about that. Data and training, collections enhancement, so that would be the idea of bootstrapping our metadata up into something higher quality, higher accuracy. Audience-driven priorities, things like enhanced search, like we've seen examples of today as well. We also can organize these ideas into sort of more tech-centric themes, and again, it's a tangled mess of knots where our traditional disciplines no longer make as much sense. And it also means a tremendous opportunity for us to be more efficient about how we develop. So I'm going to zoom in here to specifically the American Women's History Initiative concepts that were developed. And what we're looking at here on the left-hand side is the group of about 4 people who are working on the American Women's History cohort. And if you track the purple lines on top over the right-hand side, those were the ideas that they came up with. Don't worry about reading the fine print too much. Down here we have other cohorts that came up with ideas that were strongly related to or applicable to American women's history. And so you can see those popping up on the right-hand side. And then basically what you have here is a list of ideas that do the most good for the most people based on the interests expressed at this workshop, as opposed to what might be the projects represented on top, which maybe have all the virtue in the world in and of itself, but does not offer as much opportunity for us to build upon. we're going to track backwards now and see how else this method might be useful. At this layer, we can see all the key internal stakeholders, so what units across the Smithsonian are interested in these particular concepts. What was that individual origin concept that got truncated into these more overarching themes? And essentially, we have all the details that are so difficult in getting traction on a given project. So this isn't an argument to think beyond our grasp, but it is an argument to initiate and design projects with lots of open doors for expansion and new opportunities when we come to a conclusion in these collaborations. And I think that's what this type of mindset might help with. And I think the point here is that we can overlay any type of content with this concept. So these were a number of different proposals that stemmed some from the workshop, and some were ideas that were in progress originally and that were proposed to as collaborations with Google. But the exciting thing is that we could take any other idea and basically do an analysis of how effective it would be for our overarching goals. And we can be pretty flexible in terms of which content we choose to run with in this respect. And in terms of bias, and I think the shackles example, which is really important, on one hand, it's a huge liability when we mislabel an object like that, and it can be hugely damaging. I don't want to underestimate the severity of that as an issue. But I also think that there is a flip side and an opportunity there. And in the end, what happened is that surfaced a deficiency in the model that's being used. And I think that's a really critical role that we can play. And cultural heritage in general, with our data on the periphery of what general tech companies have access to, we're really going to be the critical last mile in making a lot of what they want to do possible. So it's basically, I think I'm advocating for us to value what we have to offer the rest of the industry as much as we're excited about how we can use this tech in-house. And that's more or less it. Thanks.